Sam Rigmarole again. Okay, we're recording. Apologies, the earlier live stream was just too flaky, so we've decided to record this interview with Dr. Marcus de Brun. I'm delighted to have Dr. de Brun join me here today. And what we're basically going to talk about is he's facing a fitness to practice hearing from the Irish Medical Council during the summer. But for those that don't know who Dr. de Brun is, he's a general practitioner based in North Dublin in Ireland here. He served as a principal GP of his own medical practice and was appointed as a member of the Irish Medical Council in 2018 until he resigned in 2020, citing dissatisfaction with the council's handling of nursing home protections during the pandemic, and has been a critic of the broader systemic issues regarding Ireland's COVID-19 and vaccine response. Dr. de Brun now faces, as I said earlier, a fitness to practice hearing this summer, and by the very same members he once served with on the Irish Medical Council. The Irish Medical Council is composed of 25 members. 13 of these are non-medical and 12 are medical, giving the council a majority of non-medical members, but we might discuss that a little bit. The Irish Medical Council is the regulatory body responsible for overseeing the medical profession in Ireland, and its primary role is to protect the public by promoting and ensuring high standards among doctors registered to practice. I suppose that's the intro, Dr. de Brun. I suppose if I take you back to 2018 and
Yeah.
your elevation or election to the Irish Medical Council, maybe you could give us a bit of background on that and the lead up to your kind of resignation in 2020, which caused quite a stir at the time. But maybe we could start there.
Yeah, well, I was elected to the medical council by my colleagues in medicine and predominantly in general practice in 2018. And I was elected on a platform that I had hoped to initiate some degree of reforms to the medical council. I was unhappy with the medical council, still am, and many doctors are unhappy with the medical council for various different reasons. But to cut a long story short, I suppose I was elected to the council, and I was on it for a couple of years, and I resigned, because of what was happening in the nursing homes. What was happening in the nursing homes was absolutely horrific. 12 residents. We had, 40 odd residents in the nursing home I was responsible for, and 12 of them died in a period of 8 to 10 weeks, and I mean, I'd worked for a little time in Africa, but that's in the Gambia, and it was only over there that I'd ever experienced that sort of catastrophic loss of life so quickly. And in my opinion, what was these people were dying as a consequence of government policy, of what the government was doing and or not doing. And a lot of people agreed with me.
As opposed to the virus
As
itself.
opposed, as opposed, well, look, in medicine, every death is different. And, it's very easy to say somebody died of COVID or somebody died with COVID, but every death is different. And anybody who dies of a combination of factors. And, the patients at my nursing home who died certainly died with COVID-19. Some of them died with flu and COVID-19. But to my mind, one of the main reasons they died was because they were locked away in their rooms. They were denied access to their loved ones. And remember, if you've ever been inside the nursing homes, elderly people, the most common activity they get up to all day long is watching television. I don't mean that in a bad way, but these people were bombarded with RTE 24/7, telling them that they were dying, and that there was horrific deaths everywhere, and there was death counts every night. So you have to stop and think for a minute, what was the impact of the policies, the social constraints, the media, depriving elderly people of visits from their family members, locking them inside the nursing home, depriving them of sunlight and vitamin D just from sunlight, and the benefits of the sunlight even killing the virus. So the conditions that elderly people faced and endured throughout the early stages of COVID were absolutely horrific. And these were conditions that were reinforced, if not put in place by the state. You know, when we asked for help, we were sent, do not resuscitate orders. We were advised to collect together family members and get them to sign do not resuscitate orders, where the HSE didn't want us sending elderly COVID people into the hospitals to be jamming up the hospitals with these hopeless cases. So it was horrible. You know, these people were just, they were supposed to be at the very outset. They were supposed to be the whole reason that we were all locking down and protecting. We were protecting ourselves to protect them, was the whole mantra at the outset. But that turned out to be very, very different on the ground. You know, in the nursing home I was in, there was no masks, there was no PPE. We were running out of hand sanitizer. These things, the little supplies we have, were going missing in the nursing home because people were so frightened. And gloves and masks had to be locked in a cupboard. And when we called the HSE and appealed for supplies, or appealed for help, or appealed for anything at all, we were told at the outset, well, you're a private nursing home, buy your own supplies. I mean, the only treatment that we had in the nursing homes. Now, forget about hydroxychloroquine. I don't know if hydroxychloroquine or vitamin D or these things are. I mean, well, certainly I do know vitamin D is very helpful, but I'm not entirely certain whether hydroxychloroquine was beneficial or not. But it could have been beneficial in terms of it wouldn't have caused any harm. It would have even given some benefit from a placebo point of view. And it would have given doctors like me, physicians, at least we could have engaged with the elderly people and we could have told them, yes, we have something we're going to try, we're going to help you. And what, in my opinion, what elderly people died of in the nursing homes was not just COVID-19, but they died because the love of their families was removed from them by the state. The hope of a doctor helping them was removed by the state, and essentially they were thrown under the bus. People think that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, I came into my nursing home one morning, on a Monday morning in April, to be told that there were 8 patients from Beaumont Hospital had just been transferred over the weekend. Nobody told me about them coming or anything like that. And when I asked the nurse, I said, well, do any of them have COVID? I was told, well, we don't know. And when I rang the hospital said, no, none of them have been tested. Test them yourself. Because we have to make space in the hospital, because Leo Varadkar was insisting that there was a second wave coming, so the hospitals were emptied. So we were told, don't send the elderly into the hospitals, get their family to sign DNRs, because there's do not resuscitate orders, and we're going to dump into the nursing home sector patients from the hospital, and we're not even going to bother testing them and telling you if they're COVID positive or negative. Now, bear in mind, so we're not allowed to give them hydroxychloroquine. We're not allowed to mention any kind of potential treatment or vitamin supplements. We're not allowed to treat them in any way, except with midazolam and end-of-life care. These are the protocols we're being sent. The only treatment modality we had was testing elderly patients, finding if they're positive in the home, and if they are, isolating them in their room. So at least they wouldn't be in the day room or spreading it around the facility. So that's the only treatment we had. Now, in April, the government pulled the testing facilities from the nursing home, not just mine, but every nursing home around the country. And they did that for a whole month. For 3-4 full weeks, we had no way of even testing the residents. And this was done because of Leo Varadkar's second wave, that we needed the tests for the general public. The politicians were all concerned about plummossing and pandering to the fear that was being promulgated by RTE, and they weren't remotely interested in providing any degree of help or care for the elderly in the nursing home. So the my nursing home, as I said, in a very short period of time, 12 elderly residents died, and I was with most of them when they died and as they died. And I had to go out into the car park to talk to family members who were crying in the car park or in the foyer, with sliding doors opening and closing. I had to explain to people that their loved one had passed away. I mean, I'd be in rooms and I'd see family members looking through the window at their mother or father in a bed because there was no PPE to allow them in. I mean, these conditions were absolutely horrific, and they were all as a consequence of government policy. And so
So
I
just
tried my best to yeah.
yeah, sorry, continue on there. Sorry, Marcus, keep
I
going.
said I tried my best to call the HSE. I tried my best to complain that these people needed tests, that these people needed access to their loved ones, that these people were dying, and I was ignored, dismissed, and told to essentially, do not resuscitate and use midazolam. We complained, myself,
Was that a general?
my
I just need to
patients.
interrupt. I just want to, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you there, but this, this what you've brought up there about basically treating nursing home patients as end of life, um, on an end of life pathway, seemed to become state policy, or
Yeah, well, what
because
else were you
because
to do? I mean, you're not
because
allowed. You're not allowed to send them into hospital. You're not allowed to provide them with any degree of treatment. You're not, so
was that
what else you
directed
do? The government.
officially? Was that directed? I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, was that officially directed to?
Of course, it was. It was most certainly officially directed, but it was officially directed in indirect ways. I mean, they sent us.
Okay.
We asked them for help, or asked them, "Well, what do we do? Can we send the patients to hospital?" And we were advised no, and we were advised instead to initiate end of life care. And think about it. I mean, if they're emptying the hospitals of people who are recovering from illnesses, do you think that they're honestly going to take referrals from us for elderly COVID patients? If it didn't happen, it wasn't going to happen. There was no interest in the elderly, and as I said, in my nursing home, we had 8, 10 hospital transfers from Beaumont. None of them were tested, and 12 residents in my nursing home, 30% of the population of the home died. And the others, 2 nursing homes in the town in Rush where I worked, the other was cared for by a colleague, and that nursing home was full. They had no hospital transfers and they had 0 COVID deaths. And the reason for the deaths is not just the deprivation of care and the deprivation of hope and the deprivation of their loved ones and the psychological stress placed upon them with the constant barrage of death on the television, but the transferring of untested patients into the nursing homes. The Minister for Health, Simon Harris, at the time, has a lot and had a lot to answer for. There are questions that need to be answered about why those people died. And the minister is in control of the medical council. The minister appoints the members. I was elected to the medical council, but I was appointed by the minister. Ultimately, it's the minister who appoints the medical council, and the medical council is answerable to the Minister of Health. So whilst NEFIT was controlling the state for nearly 2 years, NEFIT is composed of medical doctors. The medical regulator of the medical profession, the regulator, is the medical council. But they did absolutely nothing. They ignored every single complaint sent into them by me, by my patients, by other doctors. In fact, the doctors like myself and my colleagues who put in complaints to the medical council, who tried to get them to do something, we were all put under investigation for
Mhm.
ridiculous things. Like, what the medical council has to get a complaint in order to initiate an investigation. So I attended a public rally in 2020 to speak out against lockdowns and to try again and bring some attention to what was happening to people in the nursing homes. And when I attended that rally, a member of the public, or at least I was told by the medical council, that a member of the public complained to the council that I didn't use hand sanitizer after I shook people's hands. That was the basis of the medical council's investigation into me, an investigation that went on for 5 years and only concluded about 2, 3 weeks ago. So,
Mhm.
whilst the medical council investigated me for not for supposedly not using hand sanitizer at a public rally, the complaints that were sent in about people dying in the nursing homes, about Varadkar's reassurances that there was second waves coming, about Dr. Holohan's policies, that resulted, in my and several of my colleagues' opinion, resulted in exacerbating the deaths of many people, and shut down the health service, and resulted in the deaths of many people, and deprived people of essential services, of cancer screening, etc. All of the complaints that were sent into the regulator about those things were all buried and ignored. And what they pursued was a complaint against me, for example, about not using hand sanitizer, utterly frivolous. But the purpose of their investigation was not to find out whether or not I used hand sanitizer. The purpose of the complaint was to vilify me and get me under the aegis of being under investigation. I mean, one of my colleagues, an absolute gent, Neville Wilson in Kildare, he was recently had his investigation finished and has been punished and sanctioned. And his crime, he was punished, sanctioned by the medical council, dragged before a fitness to practice hearing. And his crime was he had a poster in his waiting room that said that people should avoid the COVID vaccine. Like, what
Yeah.
went on, what the medical council does, and how they behave is purely and solely at the behest of the minister and the pharmaceutical industry. They have no interest whatsoever in the public. None.
Right. One sec now. You've unpacked a lot there in the last few minutes. And I suppose a couple of thoughts that are striking me is number one is, the public messaging at the time was totally opposite to what you've just described there. Is everything was we were told, the public were told, we were told in RT every night, like the Angelus every day, that we were doing a lot of this was being done to protect the elderly, to protect people in the nursing homes. And what I'm hearing from you is basically the opposite was the case. Do you think that we probably, like, I suspect you don't have much faith in the announced COVID inquiry that the government have put up, but do you think actually what we need, really needs to happen in addition or to that, but is an inquiry in what happened into the nursing homes in those months and the deaths? Because you mentioned end of life, pathways, DNR, do not resuscitate some patients, and there was a massive, I've seen some scientific work done by a researcher, that shows that matches the spike in midazolam use in in that period of time, hugely. Is there a, like, I think if people, the general public, kind of heard what you just said over the last 12 minutes, they would be actually shocked. Because
I,
I
I, I'd
don't
have
think
to,
I don't
I'd
think
have
I
to
don't
say,
think
Gerry, I'd have to disagree with you, Gerry. I don't think the public would be shocked. I think that people, unfortunately, the fear mongering that went on at RTE and by politicians, the manipulation of people's fears for their own political ends, and for pharmaceutical ends and for whatnot, and for the 50 billion euros that was spent on COVID policies by the government, the money trails there, I don't think that people would be shocked. I think that people don't want to look back, and I think that part of the reason people don't want to look back is because we all bought into it. And in fairness, if we're in a movie theater and somebody yells fire, and the lights go on and there's arrows pointing to the exit, you'd be a very foolish person to stay sitting in your seat and saying, well, I want some evidence for this, or I want this explained to me before I exit the building. We all did. Everybody did what they felt was the right thing. And unfortunately, now looking back, we look at the vaccine and people are asking. I mean, the use of the COVID vaccines has utterly collapsed in the state, because the 70% of recommended people do not take the vaccine. 92% of Irish healthcare workers last year declined a COVID vaccine. And these are the same people who are giving the vaccine and being paid well to give it. So, but at the time, people took the vaccine, people followed the guidelines, because we were all afraid and we were believing. We put our faith in people like the regulator, the medical council. We put our faith in the government, put our faith in Varadkar, who rejoined the medical register, became a doctor again. We put our faith in these people. But now we look back, and I think people look back with a tremendous sense of guilt, and even some degree of self-loathing, and feeling bad that they actually did um, get injected with the vaccine, now that people know what's in it. So I think I disagree with you. I think people don't want to look back. But what I'm trying to do is I think people should look back, and I think people should be angry when they look back. And I think where they should direct their anger is at the regulator, and that's the Irish Medical Council, because they were the regulator of the medical profession. They were the regulator of the doctors on NEFIT. So when people look back and feel, oh, geez, what was in that vaccine that I took, and has it caused X, Y, Z in terms of side effects, and is it dangerous? I think people are starting to feel that now, because, as I said, the vaccine uptake has completely and utterly collapsed in the state. And the most telling proof of that is that amongst the medical profession, I mean, I repeat, 92% of medical professionals in Ireland, of the medical establishment, has refused the COVID vaccine. I mean, that's absolutely damning and telling. And what's ironic, and almost, it puts a bad taste in your mouth to think about it, but most of these people who haven't taken it themselves are happy enough to be well paid to continue to give it and promote it. I mean, the irony here
Well,
is I'm facing a fitness to practice hearing in June by the medical council, and the vast majority of people hearing part of the reason I'm there is because I believe the COVID vaccine is dangerous, and the vast majority of people sitting in my hearing will have not taken it themselves.
right, okay, yeah. Well, you see that, one of the things you raised there in that your first kind of um, monologue on that is that it was there was there was no therapeutics even offered. Did that not strike the medical profession as strange? Is that here we have this killer virus, and basically there was no there was no even like slight gambles being tried with testing different therapeutics. And we know at the time, you mentioned hydroxychloroquine, that there was a number of doctors outside of this country. I think Dr. Zelensky, is it Zelenko in the States, they were trying protocols on hydroxychloroquine and stuff like that. It seems strange to me that a COVID positive test on a faulty PCR test to begin with was initiating no therapeutic response from the medical profession. And if you were in a
Well,
nursing home,
that's
if you were in a
yeah,
nursing home, you were never going to be transferred to a hospital.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's true, but it's not entirely the full picture. There were some very, very good courageous doctors in Ireland who tried their best to treat. I mean, Dr. Pat Morrissey, for example, in the Dare, he's undergoing disciplinary proceedings by the medical council because he tried to treat patients with hydroxychloroquine, and might I add, treated them quite successfully. And in my opinion, I'm not sure if it was the pharmacology of hydroxychloroquine. It is an anti-inflammatory, and COVID is an inflammatory condition of the lung. So I doubt if it has zero benefit. I'm sure it has some. But the most important thing, I think, and it's only my opinion, that Pat gave his patients, and he refused to be bullied by the medical council, and he stood right up to them and said, no, I'm going to treat these people. These people are dying. And the thing that, in my opinion, that he gave his patients was hope.
Yeah.
He engaged with them and said, listen, I've got something here. And he was very disciplined, very himself and several other GPs, very, very disciplined in their approach. You know, they used the best science. They used the best protocols. They looked at the other doctors around the world who were using hydroxychloroquine. And he used it very, very responsibly and had very, very good effects. But he was immediately slammed by the medical council, attacked by them, and put under investigation. And he's presently going through disciplinary proceedings. So, you know, any doctor who tried, and remember too, hydroxychloroquine was highly politicized because Donald Trump took it. And as soon as that happened, it became it became the same as injecting yourself with bleach. It became a highly dangerous product, even though it's an over-the-counter medication in many countries, and it's an anti-inflammatory that we often use for arthritic, for patients with arthritis. So a relatively harmless drug a classic example of a relatively harmless drug that may, certainly entirely harmless if administered with medical supervision, that may have been of benefit. And that was any doctor who prescribed that in Ireland got the lash of it, was immediately investigated by the medical council, and is still, many of them are still under investigation.
Yeah, like it strikes, and like that it just strikes me as bizarre that we were what you said there about Trump is probably true, but in a sense that proves almost, well, how can we take our governing body seriously is if just because somebody promoted a good, potentially a good thing, or a solution, but just because he promoted it, we're not going to look at it. That seems to be one of the things that happened here. But is there also the side to this that there's what this period of time has revealed is the kind of corporatization of the GP sector, as in,
Well, you've hit the nail on the head there, and I think most people know that the reason that doctors couldn't use their clinical acumen, couldn't prescribe anti-inflammatories, that was a directive from the pharmaceutical companies, you know, and that shows the regulatory control, or what's called regulatory capture, how the medical council and how NEFIT and how the government were essentially beholden to the pharmaceutical companies, that any use of any kind of therapeutic whatsoever in Ireland would have undermined the possibility for emergency use authorization, which is what the vaccine arrived here under. That's what the authority that it was granted use under emergency use. And one of the conditions of emergency use is that there can't be any other treatments. So,
yeah, sure.
so the behaviour of Simon Harris and people on NEFIT and the medical council was completely, and can be, I mean, anybody with a few working brain cells should be able to join the dots there. These guys were completely in the pockets of the pharmaceutical industry, and the purpose of withholding drugs, relatively harmless drugs. I mean, even things like vitamin D. I mean, even trying to prescribe patients vitamin D, you were looked upon as some sort of a lunatic, and you know, that's absolutely essential for fighting viral illnesses. So There was zero. I mean, I treated my patients who had COVID. I treated them with a combination of an anti-inflammatory called a COX-2 inhibitor and inhaled corticosteroids. And I thought that was perfectly now that's outside of the guidelines and that wasn't permitted or whatever, but I didn't care. That's what I did because as far as I was concerned, this was an inflammatory condition in the lung. So if we can get some steroid into the lung through an inhaled corticosteroid and you take an oral anti-inflammatory, you're going to treat the symptoms and hopefully allow the patient to recover. Simple things like that, using anti-inflammatory, using inhaled steroids. Remember, the medical council did not tolerate anything, nothing. The guidance from the Irish College of General Practitioners was basically leave those patients at home until they turn blue, and when they turn blue because they can't breathe, call an ambulance. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. And the reason for that, as I said, was to copper fasten this emergency use authorization that the pharmaceutical companies exercised in order to introduce the vaccine. So, the politicians were captured, the medical council was captured, and the questions need to be asked, just like you were asking now. Why were these drugs? Why is it that Donald Trump can stand up on television and take hydroxychloroquine, and yet these drugs were completely deprived from the Irish people by organizations like the Irish Medical Council? Why? Why won't those questions ever even be asked?
Well, look, I suppose it's a failure of leadership across the board, medical, political, whole of society. But one thing I want to ask you is you came to your conclusion pretty quickly. When I think back to my own kind of state for that, 2 or 3 weeks after, well, from, we'll say, Paddy's Day, for 2 or 3 weeks, when you weren't quite sure what was going on. You weren't quite sure of my own instinct that there was something unreal about what was being done, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And but you resigned from the medical council pretty quick, like in April 2020, as far as like late April 2020. You, what was the trigger point? Was there a kind of straw that broke the camel's back in terms of when you decided to resign?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm going to use the wrong word. I suppose I was fortunate in that I was at the front edge in terms of I was in a nursing home where patients were dying as a consequence of policy, where patients where complaints about what was happening were being completely ignored. And none of this was making any sense to me. Now, whilst a lot of people, it might have made a sense, to not be given hydroxychloroquine because it's dangerous or whatever. Whilst it took an awful lot of people an awful lot of time to kind of join the dots, I was in the middle of it when these horrific things were happening. And when they were happening, I was appealing. I wrote a resignation letter. In my resignation letter, I wrote to the Irish Medical Council. I said, I'm resigning because of these horrible things that are happening in the nursing homes. And I outlined them. Now, when the Medical Council was contacted or issued a press statement, and you can Google this and you'll see it everywhere. When the Medical Council issued a press statement explaining my resignation, they said I resigned for personal reasons. So I was in the middle of a situation where I was surrounded by lies, by death, by corruption, by deception. So I suppose I was fortunate enough that I was able to kind of cop on to what was happening fairly quick, but it was only not by virtue of the fact that I'm anyway more enlightened than anyone else. I'm not, but it was only by virtue of the fact that I was surrounded by so much horror, and I immediately twigged that the medical council had been captured and was actually not working for the public, but was actually working for the minister, and that the minister was clearly working on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry, and nothing would stop until the vaccine was here, and everything they did was to pave the way for that vaccine. They weren't remotely interested, as far as I'm concerned, and in my opinion, weren't remotely interested in either the elderly or the general public.
Well, it's clear. Like, I put a very direct question to you. If you were a 75-year-old, we'll say, man or woman, would your life expectancy have been higher living on your own in a house at home, or living in a nursing home? having
Oh, look,
contracted
I mean,
COVID?
without a doubt, the worst place to be. I mean, some of my patients came to me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Take them out, take them home," and they did, and they survived. You know,
Hmm.
and but I couldn't publicize that at the time, and I couldn't say that. You know, but they did. Some very few brave families. You know, and remember, I mean, that sounds like almost like, you know, shifting a bit of blame onto families, that they should have taken
No, no, no. But
their
what I
loved ones
think
home, but
that
they were afraid, very much so, you know.
but I think the important point to note there is a lot of families around the country would have taken that decision if a
Yeah.
doctor or a medical professional had pulled them aside and says, "Look, I take your loved one home for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it might be." If they got that advice, I would say a hell of a lot of people would have done that. So when we
Mm.
talk about COVID deaths that were carpet bombed on RTE every day of the week, we can't really, we have to bake in that those numbers contain government policy, as almost like, as in, contribute, the government policy contributed hugely to these deaths.
Oh,
Would
without a
you?
doubt,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, and I mean, that's for saying that. That's part of the reason I was put
Yeah.
under investigation, you know, by the medical council, you know, and many of my colleagues were put under investigation. You know, a clear message was sent out to the medical profession, to doctors, by the medical council, and that message was very, very concise and very clear, and that is if you object or you complain or you highlight any flaws in government policy, or you criticize the approaching vaccine in any way whatsoever, you will suffer, you will pay the consequences. You know, I mean, a man who I have no degree or I couldn't overestimate how much admiration I have for him. But Dr. Gerry Waters was a GP who actually took it as far as he could. He said, "I'm not going to administer this vaccine, and I'm not going to refer for tests." And the medical council suspended him. They took his license off him. They took his livelihood away. You know, when they did that, in 2021, when that happened to Gerry, a clear message was sent to all doctors that, you know, you better administer this vaccine and you better not complain about it, you know. I was faced at that point with a horrible dilemma, because, like Gerry too, I had a medical card contract and I had a practice, and I was, if I didn't give the vaccine, they were going to suspend me, and told me as much, you know, that and warned me if I didn't, you know, promote these public health guidelines and administer the vaccine, that I would be immediately suspended too. So I had to make the very, very difficult decision at that time to close my practice, you know, and I did that with great reluctance. I had a couple of thousand patients who attended my practice, and a lot of those I was very close to, and very fond of. But I let all of those people down, um, and I feel I had no choice but to let them down, because if I didn't close my practice, I would have been suspended for not administering the vaccine. So, you know, we were coming back from, we were away. The kids had the spring break last week, and we were coming back on the ferry, and from France, in the camper van, and I pulled into the port, and the chap who came over to do the microchip on my dog happened to be an old patient of mine, and he used to work in the Mater Hospital in administration, but he's since got a job at the port, working in the intake or whatever. But anyway, he came over, and he checked the microchip in the dog. He says, "Oh, how are you, Dr. De Brun? We haven't seen you in years, you know. When are you coming back? Oh, we miss you. We miss you, you know." And, you know, I mean, and I know him well, and that, and, you know, I mean, and we had a little chat, and he gave me a bit of a catch up about what was going on in his family. But I left the port, and we were driving away, and I had a bit of a lump in the back of my throat, you know. I mean, I knew him, I knew his wife, I know his children, I know his father, you know, his elderly father who died, not in the nursing home, but I knew that family very, very well. And, you know, I had a lump in the back of my throat because I let all of those people down, but I had no choice. A lot of the
Well, yeah,
people, a lot of my patients would have asked for the vaccine anyway, and so
yeah. Well, you were.
you
I
know,
suppose you were in a dilemma because you let them down in one way, but you were protecting them, and then, like, the decision ultimately was to protect them from what was being proposed by the government. But it leads nicely, that story leads nicely to your fitness to practice hearing that's coming up, because basically this hearing is not based on any complaint from any patient of yours.
no, no. No, this
So,
this hearing is based upon my belief that the vaccine is dangerous. I do believe it's dangerous. Now, when I say it's dangerous, I don't think anybody who gets it is going to drop dead from the vaccine. I suppose, to use a rather brutal analogy, I don't think that there's much of a difference between the vaccine and a pack of cigarettes. I mean, I smoked when I was younger, and I'm still here. I mean, you can smoke a pack of cigarettes and it's not going to do you any harm. But when you do
but
it,
we do
you
we do
take the
have a
risk. You take the
yeah,
risk.
well, we do have a kind of unexplained excess debt situation. I don't know if you have any
Yes,
thoughts on that.
absolutely. With,
So, and I,
without a shadow of a doubt. Look, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, when you look at the figures, I hate even actually using that phrase when you look at the figures, because so many people have used it and then added on some wacky stuff after it. But yeah, when you look at excess debts and you see that, at the height of the pandemic in Ireland, there were no excess deaths. So no increase in the normal mortality figures for Ireland. Now, that if that doesn't strike alarm bells into people's minds, like, how is it that at the height of a pandemic, when RTE are pumping out death figures every day and numbers every day of people dying, that actually when you look at the mortality figures for the height of the pandemic for 2020, there was no increase in mortality, that in expected mortality in Ireland. That's one of the strangest pandemics in the history of the human race. That the pandemic, the death figures only start to increase after the institution of a very dubious vaccine, of a vaccine that works in a completely different way to any other vaccine, of a vaccine that the vast majority of people in Ireland and around the world have actually rejected, in that they don't want it anymore. So yeah, mortality figures, excess deaths, all of these do point to the fact that this vaccine is risky, to say the least, dangerous, to be reasonable. And has it resulted in an increased mortality? I believe it has. I certainly do. So I don't want to sound like I'm making light of it when I say that, when I'm comparing it to a pack of cigarettes. But I think the reason I use that analogy is I think a lot of people do feel bad that they've taken it, and I think that, they did it out of fear, and that, the people, if there's anger out there that people have taken it, then that anger needs to be directed at the regulator, which is the medical council, which is currently trying to take away my license for saying such blasphemy.
well, I think you were on a collision course with the Irish Medical Council since the day you resigned, and were quite, vocal about some of the things that have been going on in Ireland over that, over the period of time since. How confident are you that your name will be cleared in this upcoming
well
hearing?
well my name can't be cleared.
Or
I
your
mean, I
your
am.
sorry, yeah, you know what I'm getting at, though.
Well, I don't really, to be honest, because I am guilty. I don't know. I don't know how I can escape a guilty verdict. I am absolutely guilty of saying and believing that the vaccine is dangerous. I am guilty of believing that government policy resulted in the deaths, or exacerbated the deaths in the nursing homes to no end. I am entirely guilty of saying that I believe that NEFIT and the government are in the pockets of pharmaceutical and big corporate industries and corporate interests. I am entirely guilty of believing that the regulator failed the Irish people, and is corrupt. corrupt, fundamentally so. So I mean, I don't know what I can say. I mean, when they ask me, do I believe those things? Well, the answer is yes, I do. So I have to take the consequences. I suppose the only beacon of hope that I have is that if they take away my license to practice, which is what they want to do, if they take it away, that decision has to be sanctioned by the High Court. So, I mean, I will certainly go to the High Court and I will certainly look at a judge and I'll look at him squarely in the eyes. And if he says that he thinks that I should have no license to practice medicine because I think, in my opinion, the COVID vaccine is dangerous, and in my opinion, people in the nursing homes deserve a full inquiry. If a judge thinks that I shouldn't practice medicine because of those opinions, then I don't know if I want to practice medicine in Ireland anymore, and I don't know if Ireland is even a country I want to live in anymore. But sadly, when Simon Harris, who was the minister, as the nursing home disaster unfolded, and Simon Harris was the man in charge, and he essentially the man in charge of the medical council too. When Simon Harris became the Taoiseach of Ireland, that to me was a kick in the stomach, and I left kind of Twitter, and I didn't kind of post on social media. I went into my garden and I just gardened, because I really felt in my mind that this was a message to the Irish people, that the man at the helm of all of this, who should have been at the very, very least subject to some degree of public inquiry, just some questions, even just answer some questions. Not only was he completely immune to any sort of consequence or questions for decisions that he made, but he was actually promoted to the highest office in the land and is now the Taoiseach. I mean, it beggars belief. We in Ireland, I think, were either demoralized or we're degenerate as a society. And that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but when you look at who's running the country, look at the total absence, complete absence of an inquiry for the 2,000 people that died, and the people responsible, or at least partly responsible for all of this, are elevated, not questioned, but elevated to the highest office of the land. It really does beg our belief as to what kind of a country we're living in. And I think, and I just make one more point, I think part of the reason you see so many people willing to go out on the streets and you see so much anger on social media is because these ironies are not lost upon everybody. That not the vast majority of people in Ireland aren't thick, but there are a hell of a lot who are. And
Well,
that's I know that
yeah,
sounds like a non-PC thing to say, but
I
unfortunately,
think I think
that's
maybe
the reality.
the accurate word would be to say they're anesthetized to what's going on
Well,
in a sense. Is that the reality that they're living in doesn't allow for deep questions or deep. And I think one of the interesting points about you, I was going through your CV on LinkedIn before we got on here, is that you did a two year degree course in philosophy. And I thought to myself when I saw that, here's a man that's going to get himself in trouble by asking larger questions in life.
yeah.
what was your I'm just as on a personal level, what was your attraction to doing that
Well,
degree of studying philosophy?
I,
You know,
I
in
well, I'm a Catholic. I don't mind. I know that sounds like I'm admitting to to a crime, but
I'm one as well,
I'm
so
a
it's okay.
Catholic.
We
I,
have a
I
little
I
prayer group
believe
there
in
as well.
God. I know that's very unfashionable at the moment, but I do think that when the church collapsed in Ireland, I think that there was a void, and there still is a void, and there's a void of I don't know, for want of a better word, we're living in a spiritual vacuum at the moment in many ways. Now, I mean, I've started to go back to mass. I enjoy going to mass. I think churches are beautiful places, and I think many priests are beautiful men, and many nuns are absolutely beautiful people. So I think there's a lot of beauty to be had in our version of philosophy. And when I say our version of philosophy, our Irish version of philosophy has traditionally been the Catholic Church. So I suppose when the church went through its collapse, I've always had an interest in philosophy, and Christian philosophy and Catholic philosophy is a philosophy. And so that's part of the reason that I suppose that I took an interest in studying philosophy, because I mean, at the end of the day, look, life is short, for all of us. One doctor friend of mine who was with us throughout COVID was Dr. Martin Feely. And Martin Feely, the late Martin Feely, he tried to object to what was happening and what was going on, and but Martin Feely was fundamentally a decent person, a good man at the back of things. And in my career in medicine, it's those kind of basic qualities of goodness and kindness that have always impressed themselves upon me as being the things that highlight somebody's CV. But I think that without I suppose laboring the point, you can be a medical doctor, or you can be a scientist, or you can have all the qualifications you like, but it's your philosophy. It's your attitude towards kindness, and your attitude towards that aspect of the world that isn't physical and material, that ultimately kind of defines who and what you are.
Yeah, well, as you're speaking there, it strikes me as like it's asking the deeper question: what is in the common good? Like, I think what is in the common good. It's a much abused phrase nowadays, where it's almost a trademark marketing phrase. But the deeper question, like, I could. It's very interesting now, the last few minutes, what you've just said there, because it kind of connects a few dots in my head about a number of the doctors that took the stance they did, because it definitely took a certain level of goodness to do what they did in the face of an onslaught like they faced, and yourself included. But I think maybe it does come down to asking those, you know, the deeper question in that period of time is, what was the common good for my patients as a whole, not just as an individual, and having the courage of convictions to you walked away from a practice because of your belief in this. So that's like no small thing. What I wanted to ask you maybe as a final question, Dr. De Brun, is one, COVID-19, the virus. There's been one of the things that I noticed is that, especially during the period at that time, and even now, is nobody really wants to talk about the origins of it, get to the bottom of it. It's almost like we want to, brush our hands of it altogether now, in terms of looking back. But, one of the interesting things that was put to me by a couple of people is, and I just wanted to share your maybe get one or two thoughts on it, is the idea that this was in some way um, an attack on the gut biome, and gut bacteria. It's one I and I bring it up because the HSPC did, for some strange reason, or monitor wastewater in Ireland, around that period of time. But I know you have a few thoughts other than that one on it. Is COVID-19 something that you'd like to get to the bottom of, how that originated?
Well, I mean, look, it is a very, very interesting question. Where did it come from, and what caused it, and that sort of thing. And it's a very complicated question to ask how viruses interact with human beings. Viruses are very mysterious little things. They're not living. They're what's called obligate intracellular parasites, which means that they can only come alive. You put a bunch of virus on the table, it's not going to do anything whatsoever. They only come alive once they get inside human cells and start to interact with the organelles inside a cell, or the genetics inside a cell. So they're absolutely fascinating things. And the coronavirus, outside of the fact that it's a scary thing and it's a real thing, outside of that, it is very, very interesting. And it's very, very interesting as to how viruses interact with us, and how they interact with our gut biome, with our microbiome. I mean, there are more cells, there are more bacteria and organisms living within us than constitute the cells that actually make up our entire bodies. So, there's an element of philosophy, and there's an element of kind of questions around the whole natural interaction between viruses and bacteria and human beings, and the whole kind of interplay of organisms together. And we're an organism that interacts with viruses. But coronavirus is a cold virus. They represent 20% of the viruses that make up the cold, and they've been recognized since the 1970s, and well known in that respect. And what and all they ever did before was cause the common cold. But for some reason, the coronavirus mutated and had became a little bit more pathogenic and a little bit more dangerous than the common cold. And that's all that happened, as far as I can see, or as far as I'm aware. And that we had a cold virus that's certainly more aggressive and more dangerous than its predecessors. So I think that when you put this evolved version of a cold virus on top of things like the flu, or things like malnutrition, or the horrific conditions, the horrific psychological conditions that elderly patients were enduring in the nursing homes. When you introduce a cold virus that's got an extra degree of pathogenicity onto it, you're going to see effects. You're going to see consequences, and those consequences, will be death. But it will include death. But there'd be no doubt in my mind that, of course, the COVID virus interacts there with a number of rotaviruses and other viruses in the gut, are all part of this beautiful big picture of life, where everything is connected. The DNA, that's in viruses, that kind of float around in the air, enters our system, enters our airways, and enters our mucosal membranes, and interacts with our bodies and our own genetics, in a myriad of different ways. So life is a very, very complicated thing. I don't pretend for 1 minute to have all the answers, and I certainly do believe, though, that tampering with life, and this is why I object to the vaccine, and predominantly why I object to the vaccine, is because tampering with the genetic mechanism inside cells, tampering with that mechanism, is a very, very dangerous thing to do. You really have to know exactly what you're at when you do something like that. When you give a COVID vaccine that switches on inside a cell the production of protein, and there's no switch to turn off that production of protein, or there's no mechanism of determining where that protein is going to go, what cells are going to start producing it. But when you do this bizarre, absolute bizarre hijacking of intricate inside cells mechanisms, that's what a COVID vaccine does. When you do things like that, you really are, getting into the very, very basis of human life, not just human life, but all life. And that, I think, crosses a certain kind of a Rubicon, and really violates this notion of there being a holistic and a balanced interaction between DNA and RNA and viruses in the environment and viruses inside the human body. So yes, I do think that that there's certainly some interaction. I would have no doubt between COVID virus and what goes on inside our intestines and our gut. But I think that what pharmaceutical companies are doing with the vaccine to people is certainly far more dangerous than what COVID virus could ever do to people.
Hmm. Thanks for that answer, Dr. De Brun. I suppose, is there, if we take from today to your hearing, is there is there any message you want to get out? Is there that we haven't covered here today? Or is there any method that I know you're active again on X or Twitter or whatever they call again, or how people can be of assistance if you were looking for assistance or support?
Well, not. I mean, to be honest with you, I think I'm flogging a bit of a dead horse. I think
Okay.
I think that where there is a war going on, and I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I do like the way he gets things done. Now, I don't like the things that he does, and I don't like his priorities, but I do think that there is a war going on at the moment, and the war is against ordinary people, and I do think whilst I don't like or I don't agree with much of what Conor McGregor has to say or that sort of thing, I do feel that when accusations are made like that the Irish state is at war with its people, I do believe that there is some fundamental truths there. And I do think that people like Trump and this resurgence or resurgence of what's going on right wing people and protests and march, I think all of that is a symptom of this war that's going on. But I think at a deeper level, it is a kind of without wishing to sound religious, it is a kind of a war between, good and evil. And it is a war between, and what personalizes it for me is I believe it's a war between the corporate world and ordinary people. And I think when you look at things like, the carbon tax or the sugar tax, all of these things, the government has a great mechanism of helping us. And that's by apparently taxing us, by taxing people and by taking money off of people and by punishing them in that way, by taking their money and using it for their own ends. These are the mechanisms we've accepted as being how the state kind of interacts with us, So I do think there is a kind of a war going on and where on one side you do have captured institutions like the Medical Council and captured individuals like the Minister for Health and upper echelons in government power and ordinary people. And I do think that my case is a symptom of that, and that the Medical Council will put me in my place, and will find me guilty, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing I can do about that, because we are small people, ordinary people. We don't really have a voice. Government, I don't believe, is there and to serve the interests of the Irish people. And I think a lot of people are cottoning on to that and waking up to that fact. And I don't think there's an awful lot I can do about that. I'm not trying to advocate. I'd love to advocate for some political change, but I'm not. I'm trying I suppose, survive myself and be able to maintain my license and be able to pay my mortgage and feed my family. But I don't know. I think that maybe things might change. Maybe when they make an example of me and at my hearing, that maybe it'll be some kind of a catalyst. But I think in the bigger picture, I think people are waking up. It's just a pity that they're all labelled as kind of far right lunatics, and that they're all labelled as being kind of anti antisocial or whatever the labels are, that are applied to people. But I don't know. Think people are waking up, so
Yeah,
maybe some good will come of it.
Yeah, I think the magic is wearing off on some of these labels more and more as time goes by. So hopefully, um, Dr. Brun, thanks a million for sitting down to do this, have this conversation with me. Apologies for the live stream that we had to cut short there, but the gremlins interfered. But I just end by saying a big thank you, and I wish you well at your hearing. Like I wish you well, as in it's an outcome that doesn't devastate your the life you've planned. But
Yeah. Well,
hopefully we
hopefully
might
not.
talk, after it again at some point in the future. So thanks.
Absolutely, Jerry, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. You take care.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.